wasn't just Muslims versus non-Muslims, it was Hizb Tahrir versus everyone else. I work with Prevent, which is a strand of the government's counter-terrorism strategy. It prevents people from being drawn into radicalisation. My path to extremism, it wasn't based on circumstances but experiences. We went on a lads' holiday to Tenerife. There were 3 British lads and myself. Just being immersed in that hedonism, it was too much for me. I started to question the meaning of life. One of the things I remember vividly from that experience is sitting around the table at night and discussing what we want to do with our lives and having no direction really, because essentially we were just following our desires. For me, that wasn't enough, and a friend of mine put me in touch with Hizb Tahrir. Hizb Tahrir is now a group that is banned in Britain. It was banned in many countries before that. Their extremism was this unnatural focus on re-establishing an Islamic caliphate. A caliphate is a Muslim country which is governed by a caliph. The first thing they enforce upon you is this concept of man mata wa laysa fi unuqih bay'ah mata maytatun jahiliyyah. Whoever dies without giving the pledge of allegiance to a caliph has died the death of ignorance, meaning that person has died potentially outside of Islam, depends on how you interpret this hadith. Their focus was Muslims by default are in a sinful state. The only way to remove that sin is of not pledging allegiance to a caliph is to work towards re-establishing a caliphate with a caliph at its head. So it wasn't just Muslims versus non-Muslims, it was Hizb Tahrir versus everyone else. So what Hizb Tahrir essentially do is they highlight injustices around the world, and their focus would be if we had a caliphate, then somehow this issue would be solved. So quite often the narrative that they push is the concern has to translate into action, and that concern can quite often take the form of physical violence. Also, they would try and seek authority from military generals so they could orchestrate a coup in Muslim countries. My role in Hizb Tahrir was to learn their ideologies. Looking back, it was a form of, I consider, indoctrination. And then you would take what you learn and then you would stand outside mosques and with leaflets and hand them out. And then we would have debates as well at universities, at colleges. We would debate other Muslim groups about the need for a caliphate. So we would criticise those groups for not getting on board with the idea of a caliphate. And you had camaraderie as well. We would hook up for meals. We would go to different cities and give da'wah there, hand out leaflets. We would attend conferences, debates. So you had this whole social scene behind just handing out leaflets as well. And it was hard to then pull away from that, because then you're pulling away from a family. Looking back at my time with Hizb Tahrir, how come I was so mesmerised by their rhetoric and why didn't I start questioning it earlier? I guess it was a fear of removing myself from the group, from working towards a caliphate and then becoming a sinful Muslim. That was, the glue that kept us together. And with the group, you found a sense of belonging. So you had this common cause, this task of re-establishing a caliphate. And according to HT, it's one of the most important tasks, in fact, if not the most important task you can take on as a Muslim. The first cracks started to appear when I started to question their methodology. And I used to ask questions, why aren't we studying more of the Quran, more of the Hadith? Because from my understanding, the Quran is the foundation of Islam. And the response was usually, look, we've got certain verses from the Quran in our books. I mean, looking back now, you realise obviously these quotations are in isolation, misrepresented. So that was my first, I would say, negative experience. And then I don't know why, but I assumed my educator, he would be on point with his Arabic recitation. So for me, it wasn't that great. And I thought, surely we should be working on perfecting the Arabic because it's such an important part of Islam. I started to, see cracks with regards to spirituality as well. If you try to pray more during one of their lessons, one of their halaqat, they would say, no, we don't do that. Because the work for the Khilafah is so important. It's more important than the prayer that you want to perform. We've done the obligations. Anything else, it pales in comparison to the work to re-establish the Khilafah. We waste a lot of time just talking about frivolous matters. Why can't I spend 5 minutes in prayer? Muslims, we believe the Quran is the literal word of God. And if you doubt that this Quran is from other than God, then bring a book like it. And I came across a website claiming to have replicated the Quran in its style and its eloquence. At that time, I didn't understand Arabic. So I printed a chapter off and I took it to my HT contact, who was himself a Palestinian Arab. So he took it and he looked at it, he flipped it over, and he just threw it away. And he said, don't worry about it. And he said, look, a 12-year-old could write this. For me, that was a big pivotal moment. These guys don't understand the Quran. It was more a kind of a gradual withdrawal. I guess the biggest fear was leaving the group meant I was sinful by default, and nobody wants to be in that state. Eventually, I cut all ties. So I became an IP, which stands for Intervention Provider. And it's all about not just de-radicalization, but it's about clarifying misconceptions, what a Muslim is, what we do in the mosques. And it's about providing a counter-narrative to their quite often warped understanding of Islam. There have been many criticisms about Prevent being Islamophobic. From my perspective, I haven't come across anything which I would consider Islamophobic. For me, it's about safeguarding the individual. And extremism, it means taking an idea and putting your own spin on it to make it appear something that it's not. It's difficult to pin it down to one particular reason why someone would be drawn towards extremism, but I guess the most common theme I find is a lack of emotional support at home, desiring a sense of belonging and looking for, a goal, a purpose in life. One of the toughest cases that I had was a guy he was too far gone, but I guess it was about making him think. So for example, when I asked him in the presence of police officers, what do you think about the Paris attacks, 2016? His justification was a verse from the Quran where he quoted, وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. And if you are struck by a calamity, then you can respond likewise. So his reasoning was, we're dying, so they should die. I asked him to continue reading the verse and he couldn't, because that's all he knew of that verse. The verse continues, وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. However, if you are able to bear the hardship with patience, then it's better for you if you are patient. You can't change everyone, but you can make them think. And that's what my role does. It allows them the ability to think beyond the narrative. The far right and the Islamists are two sides of the same coin. If I was to condense all of my counter-narratives into one single piece of advice, I guess it would be verify information. And it's part of the Quran as well. There is a verse, إِنْ جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَأٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. If a rebellious person comes to you with news, then you should verify it, because if you act on unverified knowledge or information, then you could harm people. For me personally, I would always say verify, verify, verify.